Hello and welcome to the Poultry Network Sustainability Hub. My name is Tom Willings and this is a series of podcasts dedicated to the poultry sector discussing the topic of sustainability. Over the course of the year ahead, we're going to talk about every topic from animal welfare through to net zero and everything in between. I need to thank our sponsors. We are sponsored by Alltech, by Moy Park, by the UK Agri-Tech Centre, by Trow Nutrition, Elanco, and lastly by Aviagen. And I'm delighted today that we're joined by near 30-year veteran of Aviagen, Tim Burnside. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
I'm pleased to be here, Tom. Thanks very much.
Tim, you've done 30 years at Aviagen. You're currently the Global Vice President for Welfare, Sustainability and Compliance. I always think it's a fantastic accolade for not only a business but an industry when someone so experienced, so qualified, dedicates an entire working life to their chosen pursuit. What keeps you coming back for more? What keeps it fresh?
What keeps it fresh is there's always the new challenge. Over the years, I've done many roles within that 30-year period, but there's always something new. And again, it's the opportunity to go and talk to people about things that we care about. For example, today we're talking about welfare and sustainability, which is a passion of mine.
And you've seen a phenomenal amount of change over such a long time. I don't mean to say that you're old, but 30 years in a business means you're of a certain age, sir. How has your role changed? And could you tell us exactly what it is that you do today?
Yes, certainly. So most of my career has been within the turkey industry, moving over to the role I have now about 5 years ago. I have covered a multitude of areas, including the realm of R&D, running trials, also in terms of ISO and compliance, elements of health and safety, and then diversifying into audits and auditing, which brought me back into the welfare, the orbital welfare, and from there the development into now being the role I have, which is overlooking across all the breeding companies which are within Aviagen. So that's both chicken and turkey. And again, that lets me see not only what do we do within our own businesses, but also the impacts of what we are doing with our customers and on a global basis.
And the description of your role is a fascinating one. You mentioned trials, and we're going to come and talk about that in a moment. But you've got both sort of internal and external duties as part of your role. Any tension between what the company wants and what your the wider world is looking for?
There's always bits and pieces in one way or another, but ultimately, regardless of what we do from an internal perspective, we've always got to consider when we're looking after animals that that's our bread and butter, that's how all of us are paid. We're all paid within Aviagen effectively by what comes out of the back end of a chicken. And therefore, if we look after and care for those animals, we're caring for ourselves and we have a future going forward. So that's from an internal perspective. And then from external is about understanding what our customers' needs and equally what are the pressures that they're under and how we drive our breeding programs to meet those requirements.
Tim, this is a podcast aimed at the entire poultry industry, layers, meat birds, turkeys. Aviagen's a global leader, but perhaps better known in meat rather than the laying industry. Could you just talk to us a bit about Aviagen for those that might not know it as well? Certainly.
So what we are is we're a breeding company. So what that means is that we're involved in trying to produce the birds which the consumer eats. And that goes through a selection process, which is our pedigree level, which is effectively the best of the best. And we are looking to improve those populations through selection and measuring of particular traits. And that then goes through generations. Now, as a business, we have locations and sales on a global basis, as you talked about. We have breeding programs in the US and also in the UK, but then we have the grandparent generations at multiple places to supply those markets. So that's in terms of, and we have bases across all the continents. So we are able to supply the customer in a particular continent from that continent.
Am I right in thinking that the UK is actually quite a significant, quite an important location for global poultry breeding?
Yes. So in terms of within Aviagen, both within our chicken and our chicken and our turkey operations, one of the breeding programs is based in the UK. So in other words, the UK is responsible for feeding at least half of the world with chicken or turkey.
The UK is responsible for feeding at least half of the world. That's a wonderful statement to hear.
Absolutely. And again, it's one that we need to be proud of that we do.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the aims of this podcast, is to let people know, a much wider audience know, that the food and the farming industry has got an extraordinary story to tell in terms of a lot of the good work that is going on. I know you've just got back from your travels. You're a man who seems to spend an awful lot of time travelling internationally in your role, no doubt because you've got this huge wealth of experience and knowledge to bring. Where have you just got back from?
So in this particular instance, I've just come back from the United States, where I was talking at a conference, talking about the welfare of breeders.
Tell us about your slides.
So one of the elements we were talking about was what, as a breeding company, we do, because again, one of the things that we found on a regular basis is people do not have an understanding of what we do and what choices we're making and how we make those choices, and then what are the benefits that we have brought. So talking about those areas, and then also trying to point out that not everything in terms of the birds is down to genetics. We also have the element that the management is a key role within there. Management has a greater impact upon the outcome at farm level than the genetics.
And we're going to talk a lot more about farm management and the softer skills at primary farm level a bit later in our discussion. But for the minute, let's just talk breeding and the influences that create the selection program. Bring it to life for us, Tim, because it's a long process from concept to delivery, isn't it?
Yes, we have, in terms of the choices that we make at the pedigree level within our breeding program today are not seen for 4 years. So the choices we make today, we are in a certain extent gazing into that crystal ball, because the choices we make today is what we have for the consumer in 4 years' time. And so as we talk about, we have the fact that our breeding has changed as well over the years. Again, if we look 20, 30, 40 years back in time, the measurement was looking at production traits, because these were all very easy to measure and very easy to make a difference, to make a change. But as time has gone on, it's become a more holistic approach, and therefore we take more factors into account. So health and welfare are a much higher concern than they were before. In actual fact, the focus within the program, that's about over 30% of our selection focus.
I was going to ask you, you say you take more factors into account. How many factors are we talking about?
We're over 50. We're measuring over 50 elements within any one animal. We're taking into account as part of that selection process, and they will be at different points of time in the bird's age. And again, they will be in different elements. So we take that, we look at all these bits. They're all these elements, and everything that we measure as a trait needs to be able to be measured accurately, repeatably, and in a reliable way. And that, again, it's there for generation after generation. So these changes are incremental. So it's a small change at a time, but they build up. So again, as you were saying before, big changes, yes, if we compare 20 years ago with today, if we compare yesterday with tomorrow, not so much.
My brain is scrambled with trying to think about the long-term pressures. How do you do more with less? Your farmer, any farmer would say, I want a bird, I want an animal that's going to be more productive, that's going to be more efficient, that's going to allow me to have an opportunity of being more profitable. And then you've got sort of market challenges that will say, well, we have a different set of demands, whatever they might be. For some markets, it might be out and out welfare. Slow growing is a big topic of conversation in our country, of course, but different elsewhere. How do you balance the quantitative data driven performance selection with some of the softer stuff about consumer demand, for example, and who are the people that are feeding into these decision-making processes?
There's two separate aspects to that. One is you have with each of the, so again, in terms of a breeding program, what we're looking at in that final broiler is made up of usually 4 different lines that get crossed at the parent stock and then into the broiler. And what you have is you have different targets, different expectations for those various lines, and you are looking to build up the difference in there. So you have one element is you're looking to continuously improve each individual line, and then you have the option about crossing different lines at different points. So that's why as a breeding company, one of the things we have is we also have lots of different birds, lots of different lines, which we do not necessarily sell because, again, we have them in case we need them. So again, it means that we can, if we've got a market which wants, as you were saying, lots of meat grown very efficiently with a good level of welfare, we can sell you within Europe the 308. If on the other hand you want a bird with a higher, which scores higher in terms of its welfare and the objective elements of welfare we use in terms of those traits, but it's not in the same place from, for example, a feed efficiency perspective, we can sell you a range of gold.
So you've got the core product. Let's talk the 308. You've got the core product, and then you've got these. I think you described them as birds that you're not currently selling or marketing that feel almost a contingent line. Is that right? They've got features, they've got elements of it that you might want to bring into the fold on a more commercially available bird.
There's always that potential. Or equally, then there are reference lines. So one of the things we have, for example, is we have unselected lines. We have lines which are from the 1970s. So again, that gives us a benchmark. That gives us something to look and measure and compare against. Where's the bird today compared to the bird from 50 years ago?
Yeah, fascinating. We're talking about sustainability, Tim, and I wonder how big an influence the topic of sustainability and all of its various meanings has had on the breeding programme in recent years.
So again, within the breeding programme, sustainability has always been there. As you rightly said, with the conversation we are having today, people are becoming more aware of all the aspects of sustainability. So yes, we have the environmental, which is what most people think about. When you ask somebody about sustainability, they think about environmental. But we also have economic and we also have social. So, because again, the point we've got to have is we've got to have economic sustainability, because if we don't have economic sustainability, there is no businesses going forward. We can't do all the good things in terms of all the other aspects.
Sorry to interrupt. And that's the economic sustainability is about the most efficient bird, the bird that is going to provide the opportunity of the best return at farm level, right?
Yes, but also tied into that, we then driving out of that is some of the other areas like environmental sustainability. So again, feed efficiency is key to environmental sustainability, because at the end of the day, there's two elements to think about. The element to think about is the fact that it's the most cost to the farmer in terms of most expensive thing they have is feeding the bird. But the other bit as well is the fact that the feed comes from somewhere. So you have the environmental impact of producing the feed and there. So as you become more feed efficient, you use less feed. So if you use less feed, there's less use or less need for the raw materials to be grown. There's less transportation required and various aspects of that, which all feed into that environmental sustainability element.
Therefore, economic and environmental sustainability are hand in glove. They are
exactly
part of the same thing.
And we also, in terms of the ability to then to feed people, that then brings in your social. So again, the fact of by these improvements in efficiency is that the cost of poultry meat comes down, and poultry meat is the least expensive of all the proteins. Yeah. So again, that gives people who want to eat meat that opportunity to eat meat, which is the social aspect.
And beyond social, as far as providing a healthy diet, nutritious diet, a plentiful diet to a community, there's also the animal welfare aspect, and
Correct.
Of course that's changing, particularly in our market. We're here in the UK, and slower growing or reduced stocking density, etc. Better chicken commitment. These are phrases that in the retail environment starting to become more present in the marketplace. But from the breeder perspective, how does it influence your decision making? How does it influence your world?
So in terms of our world, again, welfare is, as you'd rightly touched upon, is from the social side, because again, it's society that chooses what welfare it wants to see. And therefore we've got to take that into account and take that as part of what we have, both within our programs, but also our wider offering. And as we touched upon before, we have that one of, if the market needs it, we have alternatives. So again, it doesn't have to be the bird which is there today. We have other birds which are more suited to some of those key elements. However, the point being is, as a starting point, they're not in the same place from the feed efficiency element. So there are differences and there are compromises. And one of the things that as a society we need to know about is invariably there's no such thing as a free lunch. So yes, from the breeding program perspective, we can improve everything for all these birds. But where's your starting point? And that's the element that as a society we need to take into account. We need to understand where in that balance is the greater emphasis.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm been in the poultry industry 15 years, a heartbeat compared to your good self. But having spent most of that time between supermarket and primary producer, I'm acutely aware that what people say as shoppers, either individually or through surveys in data, and what they actually do appear quite different. How do you reflect when you're looking at your stable? The 308 at one end of the efficiency curve, at the very very sharp edge of efficiency, economic, and therefore environmental sustainability, and the slower growing different breeds that you say with a different starting point. How do you reflect on the consumer influence and how we're all driven?
I mean, what I would say with that one is that certainly where we are within the market and the balance between the slow growing offering and the conventional offering is the fact that we have a number of slow growing offerings, but the amount of the market, the amount that we actually sell is tiny compared to the 308. So the 308 as a conventional bird is the bird of choice within Europe. If you were looking anywhere for a chicken, 9 times out of 10, it'd be the Ross 308.
And I was going to say, Tim, you're a gentleman that's very, very well travelled in the poultry industry. UK, where do you think our consumer stands in terms of some of the discretionary choices that they have available to them and that they're making at shelf level?
I mean, what I would say is that certainly Western Europe as a whole is certainly that conversation in and around the slow growing bird, in and around the higher welfare bird compared to the conventional is more acute, is more about. I would say that in terms of where we see this, where they are grown and sold, Western Europe is the main area. The difference between the UK and, for example, with the Netherlands, where in the Netherlands, if you're going to retail, you go to the supermarket, all that's available is slow growing birds. Within the UK, we still have choice. So all the offerings are on the shelf. The supermarkets are putting those offerings in place so that people can make the choice. Whereas you've got other areas where that choice has been removed from them.
Mm. Yeah. No, it's a fascinating way of feeding a population and globally, very diverse set of challenges in each location. I want to move on to science. Aviagen have done a huge amount of research, because it's one thing just sort of breeding for your kind of commercial agenda, but it's quite another actually investing in independent and peer-reviewed science. But I know you've been heavily involved with that, Tim. I wonder if you can bring that to life for us.
Certainly. I mean, one of the bits I will say that we've been involved in of late was a peer-reviewed piece which was looking at how has breeding within the poultry sector changed over the last 20, 30 years. And within that is the fact of, as we've mentioned before, that change from the selection purely for production traits, moving into that more holistic approach with multiple traits being selected, with that increased focus in terms of the health and welfare traits, and also efficiency, which is coming in. And within that, we've also shown, which is unusual for a breeding company, we've actually shown our own data and how we fit it and how that fits in with us, and showing where we are today, and also some of the genetic trends of some of these traits, some of these areas, where they are going forward, and what we're expecting to see in the field with our customers in the next couple of years.
Tim, linked to the academic research and the kind of heavy science, the peer-reviewed papers that you've done, I know that you've pulled together perhaps a slightly more reader-friendly, digestible version, Decades. I wonder if you could talk to us about what is the Decades report, who's it for, and what's it tell us?
No problem at all, Tom. So in point of that one, it was, as you rightly said, it was about trying to make that peer review paper more digestible. It's looking at is unlike the peer review paper, which is more general. This is then looking purely at the Aviagen programs and looking to see what are they doing, what have we as Aviagen brought into those programs and developed them over the years, and what have we seen as the improvements within the programs. So it's taking some of the genetic trends over the last 10 years to show, yep, okay, we're selecting in these areas, we're going forward, and this is where we expect them to be. It's it's available on our website, and it's tried to be a far simpler approach to doing it than being tied up with a peer review paper. So instead of being 20 odd pages, it's more understandable and more digestible from that approach. And our aim is for people who want to know how we work, who want to have an understanding in terms of, okay, you're a breeding company. What do you do? How are you improving anything? Because again, that perception is all we're about is production traits. All we're about is the fact that over the years, the chicken has become more efficient. The chicken has got bigger. Therefore, you must only be looking at those things. And it's about trying to explain that we have that holistic approach, and these other elements are in there, and that we are going forward on a regular basis, that those areas are improving at the same time as well as production traits. The other area we routinely also look at is we are involved with work which is looking at feed and what's the best way of feeding the birds, what are the various options which are there. Because again, coming back to that environmental topic and that question around sustainability, we have the whole thing around soya, because soya in many respects is the elephant in the corner.
I'm glad you brought up soya. I was going to ask you about soya because I think as I look at some of the carbon neutral products that are on the shelves today, I'm a layer guy, so apologies for asking a question that probably has its roots in the layer industry, in the egg industry. But a common thread of achieving low carbon or no carbon, as it's marketed, seems to be the removal of soy. In the meat industry, particularly in the conventional breeds, as I understand it as a layman, diet and adaptability of diet is a bit of a no-no. These birds are bred to perform on a certain ration, reliant on soy. How do we change that? Should we even be looking to change that?
Well, I mean, there's two separate elements here. One is the fact that soy on its own has a relatively okay carbon level. The point is its land use change. So the point is it's when it's to do with the additional carbon which is added onto soya, because we're looking at deforestation and trying to prevent deforestation. So there is a penalty applied to soya where to tie in with deforestation, because again, let's be honest, we all know that's not a good thing. And therefore we have that land use change element put in. So when we have that in there, yes, soya is remarkably carbon expensive. However, we have parts of the world which do not have that land use, that issue of deforestation, and therefore soya is less carbon rich, shall I say. And equally within parts of Latin America now, again, we can get certified soya, which is certified as not coming from areas of deforestation. Now, there needs to be a time period involved in that, but there is an agreement in terms of that. So there is potentially options of carrying on using soya, but it needs to be, in terms of aware of that land use change element. Mm-hmm. So that's the first part. The second part is in terms of, can the birds grow without soya? We've done trials and we constantly are looking at this in terms of, mainly because also it's in terms of how do we feed birds within our breeding program, if nothing else, as well as at the customer level, so we've done trials where we fed birds with varying levels of soya, between normal soya, 100% soya ration, 50% soya, and removing soya completely. And those diets change in terms of their formulation. We find that generally as you remove soya out of the diet, there's an increase in the level of fibre, and there's also an increase in the level of oil because you're trying to make up for some of the differences with that soya being removed.
It's a wonder product, isn't it? Soy as a feature in the diet, the level of protein and the mix of the amino acids. I'm no nutritionist, but as I understand it, it's basically perfection. It's nirvana. It's utopia from a nutritional point of view.
And if you use the whole bean as well, you've got the oil as well.
Unfortunately, it seems to also be a crop that's vilified in South America for creating deforestation and without getting too sort of political about it, the farming communities down there wholly reliant on crops for livelihood, and difficult debate to have. Probably not one for this particular podcast, but from a Western perspective, from a UK market perspective, if we're going to look very, very close to home, a challenge often laid to our industry is about diminishing that reliance and returning to more locally sourced proteins. We are we're only going to be a net importer of protein, suggesting that we probably need some flexibility in the diet. Do you think that's something that breeding programs in the future will bring into the bird's ability to cope with different diets in different regions?
Well, again, that's part of the trial work, is to test these and see how do the birds perform. So when we looked at this variety in levels of protein, same levels of protein but changing the ingredients, we were finding that the birds were still able to perform on these reduced soya rations. Yes, there was a slight difference in terms of a slight reduction in terms of breast meat yield, slightly worse in terms of the feed conversion, but it was rough. It was not that far removed. The biggest single thing we found within the trial was cost, because again at the current time, because of the balance, because of the availability of some of these elements, some of these materials, was that moving away from soy was prohibitively expensive. So again, if you're looking at it from the industry as a whole, part of the reason we're still using soya is, as you touched upon, it ticks all these boxes from a nutritionist point of view, and the other options don't quite do it, and they're more expensive.
That's the thing. As soon as our market is presented with a choice, and you said yourself earlier on, you effectively you can't have your cake and eat it.
No.
Yeah. If you've got a choice, and you want to do something differently, there is likely to be a cost, because if it was going to be a saving, we would already be doing it, wouldn't we? Because that's been the driver for the last 50 years. It's been largely economic.
Yeah.
And yet we're challenged with, solving the conundrum as to how do we feed a growing population in a planet? How do we do more with less, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And at the same time, how do we get away from...
Correct. And this is one of the areas, and certainly within one of the bits, as you rightly said, with poultry, is the fact that poultry globally is not a subsidised form of agriculture. So therefore, it's had to make decisions, and it's had to make decisions, which means that it can be sold, that people will buy it. So again, if there's a sector which is likely to be able to drive that and move that one forward, it's the poultry sector.
It's got a great history. We've got a great story to tell. I think it's a sorry state of affairs that you look at the growth of the poultry industry. Again, let's just talk UK for a moment, but there's negativity around the scale of growth of the poultry industry. But one has to step back and look globally and think, we've got more and more people eating meat. That's a sign of not only increasing population, but increasing affluence of population. We're able to farm birds in a growing proportion of the world, meaning we can provide a clean and nutritious and efficient and healthy protein source to a much greater proportion of the population on the planet. And if people are eating chicken, we're feeding them a low environmental cost, low carbon footprint.
Yes.
Protein.
Absolutely, and this is also something that the UN's Food Agency have put in, and they publish within their annual reports, is showing that the expectation through to 2030 is that the the amount of poultry, the amount of meat consumption being produced globally is going up. So the amount of meat being produced is going up globally, the amount of expected consumption is going up globally, but the majority of that increase is coming from poultry.
Exactly.
Because
meat production is growing faster than world population growth. More people are eating more meat, and yet emissions are doing the opposite. Emissions are falling, and that is down to poultry. That's down to the efficiency that guys like you are breeding.
Correct. Absolutely. And this is the thing, and again, this is the point which is being made, is that yes, we have this increase thing, but the expected change in the CO2 output is not, it does not match that increase in production. And that comes from poultry. That comes from the efficiency of poultry and the reduction and the lower carbon impact of the bird.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. That's kind of the long-term trend, is doing more with less. We've talked a lot about that. I'm fascinated to learn about the acute pressures, because let's take COVID, three years or whatever ago. Dreadful time. But there's a huge suddenly interruption in global supply chains. There's a change in consumer behaviour. There's a change in working patterns across the world, etc. That's one example of an acute, sudden, perhaps predictable but unforeseen change. There might be others, such as growing awareness of antibiotic resistance, antimicrobial resistance in human health, with animal health really under the spotlight as being a heavy user of antibiotics. How do these sort of acute, immediate pressures shape the breeding programs and the long-term work that you're doing?
So in many respects, in terms of a number of these, it's about how we manage the program rather than not necessarily the program itself. So again, within our program, we have not used we use antibiotics only when needed. So again, it's not something that is routinely given to the animals, because again, we're looking at genetic potential, and the point of treating animals and giving them antibiotics may cloud what we're seeing. So do we know the difference between bird A and bird B is purely down to the genetic potential, or is there something else in there which has boosted it? So again, that's part of the reason we do not have antibiotics within our program as part of the routine things. We will treat birds if they're sick. So has that changed where we were 10 years ago? No, that's the way that we've always worked to look, because again, it's all about that genetic improvement. Other elements which are into how do we manage that? How do we work with people? Because elements like COVID, that's one of the ones which, again, that's how about the management of our people and doing these things.
And also, I want to get into farms and how the farms themselves sort of feed back into your work. But we're going to take a quick break. Just as a reminder, you're listening to the Sustainability Hub, brought to you by Poultry Network. My name's Tom Willings. I'm here with Tim Burnside, the Global Vice President for Welfare, Sustainability and Compliance at the Aviagen Group. And a reminder, you're listening to the Sustainability Hub, brought to you by Poultry Network. Tim, we've had a great conversation about the breeding program and about we're just starting to get into the Aviagen team, and I think you said 8,000 employees globally. I'm fascinated to learn about the relationship between Aviagen and the network of industry, hatcheries, breeder farms, actual commercial growers, processors. How does that all work?
So what we have there is that we have people within our business whose time is spent, the technical experts, who spend their time to go and see our customers, to see what they're doing, but equally to try and help and give advice. So one of the bits is spending time with those people gives feedback into the loop in terms of how we make changes with the breeding program, how that filters in, because again, that lets us know what our customers' pressures and needs are and how they see the product performing, which helps us in terms of making some of our choices and are we in the right place? Are we making this the right focus in terms of the choices we make within the program? At the same time, that also gives the opportunity or part of the training element, part of the bit of passing on the skills, because the bird of today is not the same as the bird of yesterday. Because one of the things that we have within the poultry sector is that many people have done it for a long time. And the line that they usually give you is, I've done this, it's just the way I've done it for the last 20 years, which is great.
Oh, I've heard that. I've heard that in my time, yeah.
Absolutely. That's great if you've got the bird of 20 years ago, but we don't. So part of the thing we need to be doing is that we need to be upskilling or training or providing information in terms of the management one on how do you manage the birds, how do you get the best from the birds, because it changes over time.
And I guess that's a two-way process, is it? You're learning from ground level, from those that are doing the do day in, day out, and then your team are sharing their insights along with their knowledge of what the bird is capable of doing and the conditions that the bird needs to be kept in, et cetera, et cetera. You're sharing that as well.
Correct.
So it's a two-way
process.
It's a
two-way street. It's a two-way street. It's a two-way process, and it has to be, because again, it's the point of view, is the fact of the customer has to be assured that we are listening to them, and again, we are making changes to meet their needs. But again, it's also about where are the changes, what do we need to do, where are the gaps. So again, we've talked about trials and work before. We do that in terms of management, because as I said, the management needs are changing, and it's not all about genetics. I mentioned earlier, I think, the fact that roughly about 80% of what goes into the bird and producing the bird and growing it is down to management.
I read this in one of your papers that you kindly circulated before we sat down, and it highlighted, I think, just how little an influence in outcome the system had versus the management. So it wasn't about housing environment or stocking density, etc. Actually, it was about the human element on the farm. Tell us about that.
So I think the particular bit which you're making reference to, Tom, was a study which was done in the Netherlands. So it was done by another group rather than ourselves, which was looking at how birds are growing in the Netherlands with different farming systems. So within the Netherlands, I know I mentioned earlier in terms of in the supermarket, it's only still growing, but they also have conventional birds as well. They go for export. So within the Dutch system, they have different concepts which involve a combination of different growth rates and different farming systems. And within this study, there was a comparison which was done across the 4 different systems which were in place. And it was looking at the welfare outcomes, both from the bird itself, so the resource-based elements, and also some of the resources. So in other words, how was the shed set up? How was the stocking density and elements like that? And when you look at it purely on the basis of the outputs of the bird itself, so you're only looking at the animal. So again, it's that concept of what is the welfare that the bird perceives, rather than necessarily what is the wider one that you think makes the bird, you think improves it. Then what we saw was that the differences between the systems was much smaller. So yes, there was a difference between the slowest growing birds and the conventional birds, but at the same time, we had farms where the welfare score was higher for the Ross 308 than the slowest growing bird. But conversely, we had some of the slower growing birds with a lower welfare score than the Ross 308. So again, management's key. How people look after and grow their birds is as important, or if not more so, than either the genetics or how you act or the resources available to them.
I think that's a really powerful message for a market. If market's a casual word, if I refer to the market as being the grower, in my experience, you give a bird to a laying farmer, and occasionally in their mind, they've got a prejudiced view as to what's going to happen. They know what the outcome is going to be.
Yeah.
In their mind, they think they know what the outcome is going to be. If you can demonstrate with your people that actually the biggest difference is you, it's the human being, it's the way you apply your knowledge and your care and your attention to the environment that you're creating for the bird, and that is what's going to lead to an outcome. That's an incredibly powerful message, and I suppose links into your network of clubs and incentive schemes and other work that drive continuous improvement at ground level, which is, I think I'd love you to talk about that actually, if you would.
So I was just going to touch the first element that yes, you're right in terms of management is key, and how people look after it and how they look after the animal is essential, and the clubs are set up to help in terms of it gives that combination of a friendly level of rivalry because you're competing against others. But what we're looking for in all the clubs is to try and reach for improvements when those improvements are multifactorial. And again, that overall helps the sector. It helps poultry globally and feeds in around. So again, with some of the bits with the clubs, it's not just us as Aviagen giving tips, it's the fact that you have those focal points, those meeting points, and farmers talking to farmers will pass on tips as well. And that's another one of the benefits that these give. It's the fact that if it's not just from Aviagen going, this is the way you do it, we have people who are getting good results saying, this is how we did it.
I think it's a phenomenal blend. I have to say, I tip my hat to that continuous improvement work of celebrating success at farm level, while at the same time investing very heavily in science and scientific development internally. We're going to talk about genomics in a moment, with then the combination of an independent overview with scientific research that then backs up all of your claims and validates the progress that you're making. I think you put those three things together and it's a compelling story. Let's just go back to the breed program a minute, because I really want to learn more about genomics. Can you just explain what genomics is?
Certainly. I mean, so genomics is looking at the birds on a genetic level. It's looking at what we have in terms of the genetic makeup of the animals, and we are able to increase what we're looking at. So again, I mentioned before the fact that one of the things which allows us to make better selections is having better data. And what genomics allows us to do is, in certain areas, look at traits before they're necessarily expressed. So it's the fact that, on one hand, when we're looking at, for example, egg production, we can actually make choices before the bird goes onto a laying farm about how it will perform, how it will lay eggs, what number of eggs it will be laying. So we actually get information about that expectation because it's got good genes. So therefore that fits in without necessarily relying upon data from its mothers, its aunts, aunts, etc., that how they performed, and therefore we expect from the information from there that we bring that in. So it adds an extra level of information and extra knowledge there. The other thing that genomics does is it allows, at a simple level within our breeding program, it allows us to assign parents. One of the things we used to do was have males and females housed together in very small groups, because again, what we need to be able to do anything from a pedigree level is know who the parents are. When we have a day-old chick, who are the parents? Because that lets us, because again, that's that history, that knowledge, that understanding. And one of the things that we brought within our programs is sire assignment. So that means that we have the ability to look at a chick and know who its parents were. So it means that we're a bit able to move away from a situation that we used to house one male with 10 females to a situation where it's like a normal pen. So what the type of thing you would see below pedigree level, they're all running around together. Because we can go back the way afterwards and check who the parents are. What that allows us is the fact that we get better males, because instead of being just, the male will always have the 10 females. No, the males have to compete. So we also can get behaviours in terms of mating come in, and we can look at, and going forward, there's always the potential of looking at some of those aspects in there as well. So these are things which genomics brings us, and it just helps within the program, and it gives us more information, more data, which allows us more accurate selections.
I was going to ask you about two specific welfare outcome measures that, that's a term that we use a great deal, isn't it, in our market. We're kind of retail driven, and we want to be able to measure the success in improving the condition of our farm animals. And in the statistics that you shared with me, and again, a reminder to our listeners that those slides are available on the Sustainability Hub tab on the Poultry Network website, there's marked improvement in foot pad dermatitis, pododermatitis, and gait score in recent years. Is that a hallmark of genomics specifically, or is that simply focus on selection and the multifactorial elements of selection?
So genomics adds in, it brings in data, but it doesn't replace anything. It just brings in more data and allows that accuracy. But in terms of where we're seeing those improvements, no, that's down to the fact of the focus in looking at those traits and the weighting of those traits within the balance, and the element there, and having those reliable, repeatable measures so we can actually see it. Because one of the things also we have done within our programs is that we've got to remember that to be able to select against a trait, we've got to see it in the program. So we've actually, whereas normally you would consider that the pedigree environment is marvelous, it's wonderful, that on its own means that sometimes we don't see it. So we also have...
You've got to create a realistic environment to see these traits.
Well, what we do sitting side by side is we have what we would describe as a multi-environment selection. So we have the brothers and sisters of those animals sitting in our pedigree environment, sitting in an environment which is closer to commercial reality, or perhaps a poorly managed commercial reality.
Right.
So again, we can then see how are those animals performing in that environment, as well as how are they performing in the pedigree environment. And what we're looking for is birds which perform, families which perform well in both environments. Again, the ones in the other environment, they don't come back into the program. That's once they go into that, that's them there. Nothing comes back in. Because again, that's a whole part of the element with the biosecurity that we have within our programs and how important it is to keep it clean. Because as we've talked about, we're at the top of the food chain. So we've got to ensure that we have nothing which comes down and passes through the process.
You mentioned biosecurity, obviously with the avian flu globally, absolutely rife and raging. There wouldn't be too many lessons that you haven't learned on how to keep livestock safe and clean. What do you see as you go around in your travels by way of biosecurity and contrast between markets?
Well, all I will say is that biosecurity is a risk management process, and you've got to bear in mind what's the value of the stock, what's the possibility of disease, and what's the outcome if your stock get that disease. And therefore you need to take that into account, and therefore the more valuable where that is, you will increase levels. So certainly, globally we see vastly different approaches to biosecurity. But what I would say is that biosecurity is as much as a state of mind. It's a way of thinking. And what you tend to find is that people who think in a biosecure fashion act in a biosecure fashion. Because if you want to put things in place, you've got to remember at the end of the day, people have to do it. And if you don't get that mentality in place, you may have what you think is a great system, but people might not do it. So that's where, as I said, you've got to remember that that's part of the process. You can't just simply say to people, I want you to do this and expect that to happen.
Yeah. Where do you see sort of best practice? I know at Aviagen in the US, your sites are certified as biosecure. That sounds like quite an accolade. But if we sort of come down a level and we just talk about business and industry globally, where do you see the signs of sort of best in class performance on biosecurity?
You see them in for example, Europe generally performs very well. Because again, it comes down to what are you considering the value, what do you consider the importance, and you're putting in place systems, and the fact that people are following those systems. So it's that element of we have a dedicated entrance. We have sharing in facilities. We have elements like that. So again, as you move into those increase your level of biosecurity. They reduce the risk, and so you tend to see, where you have significant number of animals or you have significant value in terms of generation. So again, what you tend to find is, pedigree will have far higher, far greater than moving to grandparent, moving to et cetera, coming down. So you have that there.
We're talking sustainability, biosecurity, obviously part of sustainability, but coming right back closer to home, just as an opportunity to call out great work from your colleagues' perspective. Are there any sort of stories that you'd want to share?
Certainly. The point with sustainability, we've got the fact that what as Aviagen brings to the industry, which we've talked about earlier, which is that fact that within our program and the feed efficiency which drives down. But at the same time, it's not just about that. It's also what we do ourselves. What can we look at? Where can we see to make these improvements? So again, you have the simple ones of when we look at it, you need to consider what resources come into your system. So what other than feed? Because again, we've talked about feed and the elements there. So, but what other resources come into your system? What can you look at? What can you make changes on? So we're seeing that one of solar coming in vastly within various bits of the business. If we take, for example, hatcheries And farms also have got a lot of roof, which means you can put a lot of solar panels up, which will help in terms of reduce your electricity, which depending upon the part of the world you're in, will have a lesser or greater impact. We also have elements such as you have water coming in. We're using water as a resource. We use that for cleaning. We use it for the birds themselves. We use it also in terms of for vaccination. So we have water. Where does that water come from? How are we treating it? Is there elements that we can reuse it? So, for example, we now have within the UK, both within our vet lab and also within our hatchery, we have systems in place to purify water. Previously, we bought in bottled water. We now have a system in place where we have purification in-house, which means that we've removed that step. We no longer have that in place. Has that improved the sustainability of the system? Yes.
But little by little, building
little
blocks
by little
just together.
Exactly, because again, it's like within the breeding program, if you add lots of little bits together, you get a big jump. It doesn't have to be a big jump all at once. Just take those small steps, because sustainability is a journey. We're all traveling along it, and we're at different points. And again, it's where we are and how we move forward and what we're looking to do.
Is that a great way of wrapping up there, Tim, where we say, there is no silver bullet to the long-term goal of mitigating our impact? It is about the small, incremental, continual, never-ending steps to improvement. And no matter how small a step forward it might be, they all count, they all add up, they all aggregate. And, we need not lose sight of the fact that we're making progress.
Correct. Yes, because again, progress is progress is progress. The fact, again, if we're making any progress, is progress. And we need to think about it in that one. Because again, a lot of the big steps, they've already happened. And so we're not going to see giant leaps now, because again, if it was easy, we'd already have done it.
So sustainability as a topic and as a journey, I hate the journey word, but let's use it here, is a very, very long term. And Aviagen they've got roots going back nearly 100 years in breeding chickens. It makes an awful lot of sense that we're not about to suddenly solve every challenge that's in front of us today, but little by little, step by step, we're definitely making inroads in the right direction. So Aviagen have been breeding chickens for nearly 100 years, roots of the business in the 1930s. It sounds as though the journey toward a sustainable future is a continual one. It's a never-ending one. Tim, it's what keeps you coming back after now 30 years in the business. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, Tim Burnside, Global VP for Welfare, Sustainability and Compliance at the Aviagen Group. Thank you to Aviagen, one of our sponsors for the Sustainability Hub, and thank you to all of our sponsors. So thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to sign up to the Poultry Network newsletter in case you haven't done that already, and subscribe to this podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll be along with the next edition next month.